As this month's presidential election nears, violence in Afghanistan seems to be increasing on an almost daily basis. And it's adding pressure on the U.S. administration to find the support to continue with its long and costly operation in the country. And for more on this, we cross live to Dina Gostomski, who's in Washington, D.C. for us. Dina, hello there. So over to you.
Hi there. Well, yes, the war in Afghanistan is getting more and more intense by the day. U.S. troops and NATO allies really stepping up military operations in certain regions. U.S. General Stanley McChrystal says he wants to see more troops on the ground to train the Afghan army and police force. Now, Secretary of Defense Robert Gates is in Brussels right now discussing matters with NATO allies. So, could all of these efforts actually make the war end more quickly, or could they have the opposite effect? If you listen to some British officials lately, they don't seem too optimistic. UK's defense minister came out and said that troops on the ground severely underestimated the Taliban. Now, UK's most senior diplomat, Sir Nigel Sheinwald, came out also shortly before that and said that British troops could be in Afghanistan for decades. So if this is true, could it cause the United States to dramatically alter the way that it conducts the war there? Well, to help me answer those questions, Ivan Eland. He's a foreign policy expert and senior fellow at the Independent Institute. Thank you so much for being here. So, Sir Nigel's comments mark the longest timetable set forth by a senior British official when it comes to Afghanistan. What message, then, does this send to the U.S., to the U.K., to the people of Afghanistan? He's talking about British troops, U.S. troops being there for years and years and years to come.
Well, I think there's a lot of restlessness among the U.S. allies about this war, and certainly Obama has said that they have to see progress within a year, but these things tend to last longer than anticipated, as we saw in Vietnam, as we saw with the Soviets in Afghanistan before. So I think it could be a long, if they're going to make a commitment, and Obama's sort of, it's his war now that he's escalating. They've added troops. McChrystal wants more troops, so they're putting more troops in. It's hard to say after a year, oh, well, now we're just going to pull out because nothing happened, because people get invested in, well, we've wasted all these resources. We don't want to, we don't want to waste them. We want to see something happen. So I think the more troops you put in, the more pressure it is. But I think it has a counterproductive effect, because the Taliban started its resurgence when the U.S. troops stayed after the initial victory against and knocked the Taliban out. So I think the problem is that Obama doesn't see that foreign occupation of Muslim lands usually leads to intense resistance. And I think the U.S. and NATO war in Afghanistan is now destabilizing Pakistan.
Do you think that this could be like another Iraq for the United States then?
Well, I think it could possibly be worse. I mean, the coalition has fewer troops per inhabitant than in Iraq. Afghanistan is the terrain is much more mountainous. They have a sanctuary in Pakistan, and Pakistan is an ally of the United States. So curiously, that's a handicap, because you can't just go and bomb the sanctuaries like in Cambodia or Laos in the Vietnam War. So you have all these factors, and you have a this Taliban resistance is much more ideologically based than the Iraqi one, much more zealous, and they're actually using techniques that are much more sophisticated in maneuvering against the Allied forces.
Now, I have interviewed a lot of experts on Afghanistan, from George Friedman to Doug Bondo to Pat Buchanan to yourself. All of the people that I've spoken to say Afghanistan is a graveyard for empires. This is where empires go to die. Do you think that the Obama administration is taking that at all into consideration?
Well, I think the Bush administration should have probably taken that into consideration when they did an occupation, rather than just taking out the Taliban and saying, if you harbor terrorists that attack the U.S., we're coming back to get you. That's what they should have done. Of course, this occupation leads to the resistance, and yes, the Bush administration did not take this into account, and I think the Obama administration has not taken it into account when they've escalated the war. The British lost several wars. The Soviets lost the war, as you know. And I think the Americans are losing the war. America and NATO are losing the war now. And so I think, history is, it doesn't take much. And after the U.S. Vietnam experience, that should have been a clue that these guerrilla warfare can be very hazardous to major powers, because it certainly equals the playing field and sometimes goes to the guerrillas, in fact. And so there's all these experiences, and they just sort of ignored that.
Well, thank you so much for being here and for your insight. That's really the question. Could history repeat itself when it comes to Afghanistan and the U.S. there right now with the allied forces? Back to you in Moscow.